Hey there, Geek boys and girls, this is Randy from Geek Legacy, and I'm here to give you a spoiler-free review of Rogue One, a Star Wars story. And here we go. One of the first things you're going to notice is there seems to be a lot that you see in the trailers that is not in the actual movie. Case in point, remember this shot with Jyn saying, "This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel." Nope. Apparently she doesn't, because that is not in the movie. Okay, how about that super cool shot where they're all running on the beach towards the oncoming Imperial walkers? Nope, not in the movie. Alright, how about that super badass shot when Jin's on the catwalk and whoom, here comes this gigantic TIE fighter? Nope, not in the movie. How about all this dialogue from Forrest Whitaker?
What will you do when they catch you? What will you do if they break you? If you continue to fight? What will you become?
Nope, not a single word of it in the movie. Alright, now this shot has got to be in the movie, right? Nope, not in the movie. But what is in the movie? I'm glad you asked. Even though it sounds like I've concentrated on the negative, on all these things that were kind of promised to us but not put in the movie, I'm going to say that the movie doesn't feel like it's missing anything. And had we not seen those in trailers or teasers, we wouldn't know that it's missing at all. I think that when they went back and did those really extensive reshoots a few months ago, they shot a whole bunch of new stuff, and a lot of the marketing materials that they had come up with ahead of time reflected the older cut of the movie where maybe some of these shots were incorporated. I find it really interesting, though, because they had to have spent a fair amount of money doing all the visual effects for these shots, ultimately for them to end up on the cutting room floor. But if they did it because of the fact that it puts together a more coherent story or a better story or a more emotional story, then I say they did it for the right reasons, and it's completely cool. And I will say that if nothing else, this story is rather emotional. Partially because it takes you back to the original trilogy era, which is the era that I grew up in and the era that I love in terms of the Star Wars universe. And it gives you so many things that you're familiar with. Familiar alien species, familiar droids. Not really much in the way of familiar planets, but you don't really feel that that's lacking. In fact, it's kind of nice that you get to go to different locales that we haven't seen before. I liked seeing a variety of different stormtroopers, but the ones that we hadn't seen before, they're not trying to force them on us. There's not a whole bunch of them. And speaking of a whole bunch of stormtroopers, one of the nicest things is seeing the era of the true Imperial might. You know, when they're at the height of their power, you see dozens of Star Destroyers, hundreds of TIE fighters, thousands of troopers, walkers, tanks, all sorts of really cool stuff. You really get the idea that these guys are in charge, they are settled in, and they are going to be a force to be reckoned with. And that's kind of a bone that I had to pick with The Force Awakens, because the First Order, you only saw one Star Destroyer, maybe a couple dozen TIE fighters, and not a whole lot of troopers. It just felt very small, and it didn't feel very significant. This reminds me of the grand army of the Empire that we were originally introduced to in the original trilogy. I don't want to go into anything spoilery, but you did see him in one of the trailers, even though it was kind of from behind. I will say Grand Moff Tarkin is in it, so we get to see Peter Cushing. He is kind of digitally recreated, and they did it in a really respectful way. The voice sounded pretty good. The CG, I mean, it wasn't as good as the de-aging they did on Michael Douglas for Ant-Man, but I would say it's better than Jeff Bridges from Tron Legacy. Granted, yes, I know that was 6 years ago, but that's just kind of the benchmark that I put out there. It's kind of more on par with the younger version of Robert Downey Jr. that they did for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Still really super cool to see because I love that character. And honestly, he's in the movie way more than you would expect, which is part of the reason why I feel that the director Orson Krennic character, Ben Mendelsohn's character, wasn't as fully fleshed out as he could have been. He's a pretty cool badass. You see a lot more into his past and into what makes him do the things he does, more so than any other Imperial officer in history, which is pretty cool, I think. Darth Vader is a badass no matter what movie you put him in, no matter what scenario you put him in. You see more of Vader in here than you probably ever expected to see, and you see him do things you probably never expected to see him do either, and that is what makes it amazing. Now, granted, he only has like 3 to 5 minutes of screen time, but when he is there, he absolutely chews up the scenery, and then some. So be prepared if you're coming into it looking for a lot of Darth Vader, and you're looking for it to really remind you of the old saga movies. That's really not what this movie is for. If you go into this movie expecting it to feel like the Skywalker saga, you're going to be disappointed. This has an entirely different look and feel to it. The sensibilities are different. It is, after all, a war film at its heart, and it feels like one. And what happens in war films, there are high moments, there are low moments, there are moments of loss, there are moments of, the rug being pulled out from underneath you because you think it's going to go one direction and it takes a turn. Some of my favorite things about this movie are the space battles. They're absolutely amazing, and they totally take you back to the original trilogy. Seeing TIE fighters and X-Wings dogfighting in the sky with tons of giant capital ships all around. Without going into any story elements, Jyn Erso is the main character, yet she doesn't get as much screen time as you might expect. I think it's because it's kind of an ensemble and we have to follow a lot of separate storylines. There's a lot of rebels doing a lot of different things throughout the movie. So if you're expecting a real clear through line with her, where we're constantly following her around, it's going to kind of throw you for a loop. But that's okay because all these other characters are very interesting as well. Because of the fact that they are kind of split up and we don't get a whole lot of screen time with any of them really, you don't get a deep, rich backstory like we did, for example, with Rey in The Force Awakens, or like any of the other characters from the prequel or the original trilogy that we got to spend several movies watching them develop. This, because of the nature of being a standalone movie, we just get one shot with these characters.
The Imperial forces are converging on our present location.
If I were forced to rank this with the other Star Wars movies, this is how I would do it. Empire Strikes Back is still my number 1, Return of the Jedi, and then it would be a tie for number 3 between A New Hope and Rogue One. Then we go to Episode 7, The Force Awakens, and then 3, then 1, then 2 last. It's how I would currently rank the Star Wars Cinematic Universe. That being said, I would definitely call this the best of the prequel movies. And yes, you kind of do have to call this a prequel because it does take place before the original trilogy. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the prequels, but there's especially nothing really deeply wrong with this movie. Clear your mind of questions, as Yoda said in Empire Strikes Back. Just kind of go into it with an open mind. Have fun with it as much as you can. Know that, it's going to have its ups. It's going to have its downs. Look for all the little Easter eggs if you're a Star Wars fan. Look for the tie to Rebels. Look for the ties to the original trilogy, specifically A New Hope. Look for the ties to the prequels. There's stuff there that warrants repeated watching because you're always going to be seeing something different. Thank you for watching this video, and be sure to check out David Edmondson's written review for Rogue One, A Star Wars Story on geeklegacy.com. We have very similar views on the movie, but he has a much more journalistic way of putting it into words, so realistically, it's probably going to be a little bit more eloquent than my video ramblings, but be sure to check it out. You'll be glad you did. Until next time.